Most people buy land on emotion, but you and I, we're not most people. So this video is all about how high-level buyers make smart, strategic investments in land. Now I'm going to make an assumption up front. You're not used to massive decisions. You've made big decisions either as the head of a corporation, in your own business, maybe as an engineer. So buying land, it shouldn't be very confusing. But the truth is, what most people think they know about land is either just that shallow surface level or it's just flat out wrong. Because here's the thing, this isn't HGTV. What we're talking about here is a future investment for you. This may be a future dream property, a retreat to the mountains, could be your future homestead. And what I'm about to walk you through is the exact same analysis that I use for myself when I buy land or when I've got clients that are using me to identify a piece of property that they want to buy. So the first thing that I do in this checklist that I have is I want to identify the function, whether it's for me or my clients. For me, function's pretty easy. I know exactly what I'm trying to identify a property for. But with clients, there's a bunch of different things they could be using. The first thing could be they want a legacy property. They want something that they can pass down to their kids and their grandkids and their great-grandkids, and they want this thing to stay in the family. So they're really trying to identify something with unique features that they're going to want, their kids are going to want to come visit and bring the grandkids long into retirement. The second thing a lot of clients are looking for is something that's got some off-grid flexibility, something that's going to be a homestead for them, something they can move to. Maybe they want to grow their own fruits and vegetables, maybe they want to have some cattle, but they want to have the ability to homestead this property and they want some of that off-grid flexibility. Another thing I get a lot is they want something that's a hedge against inflation. You know, I mean, we've had some issues with the stock market, and the stock market does go up and down, and realistically land tends to hold its value. So some people are just looking to park that money in land, and you know, if they use it on weekends, if they camp out there, maybe they've got an RV, maybe they've got some motorcycles and things like that. They're just going to use it lightly recreationally. But at the end of the day, what they're really looking to do is preserve that cash into a finite asset. And what you've got to realize between these different uses is land has different values. You're not going to put a cattle ranch on the side of a mountain, and even though it would be great to have a beautiful cabin with amazing views on the side of a mountain, that thing may have $100,000 or $150,000 need for a driveway. And on the other hand, something that may be awesome for cattle, great grazing land, bottom land, could be in the floodway and you're never going to build a house on it. So again, identifying what that function is and what you need it to function as before you start looking for land is primary goal number one. The second thing here is once you've got that function dialed in, you know what it's going to be. All right, now you're going to start looking for land, and you're going to have to figure out your location and things like that. But as you're looking for land, you have to understand the location layers, okay? Is there a city that has any rights, or can they put any restrictions on that property? Is it a county level thing? Is it a state level thing? You've got to understand how the local jurisdictions see that land and what they can restrict you on it. And this is where honestly, the most educated people get blindsided, because one of the fallacies is I go buy a piece of property and I can do whatever I want with it because it says it's unrestricted. That's not necessarily the case. It may be unrestricted from a city standpoint, but you could have county zoning overlays over that property, or you could be in an ETJ, extraterritorial jurisdiction, that the city still has some say on what you can and can't do on that property. And then beyond that, even if you're outside of city jurisdiction and the county really doesn't have any major overlays, you do have state requirements. So if you're going to put in a septic system, you know, you're going to have to make sure that you can put that in. The state of Texas, we've got TCEQ, they're going to have some things, some hoops you've got to jump through, make sure that you build it correctly. The county's going to make sure that your well and septic aren't too close together and things like that. But then even moving beyond that, you've got to check out, are there any plat notes that restrict anything? Because on plats, there can be notes in there that say, I'm sitting here next to a creek, you can't build within 150 yards of the creek. Maybe they'll use feet, but the point stands, and it may not even be in the floodplain. You may be on a high bank, but they may have a water quality buffer that you can't use. And if you've got 30 acres and you dreamt of building on a cliff or a bluff overlooking a river or a creek, but you can't do it, then you're not going to be able to get the views that you want. So is the property even worth it? And then the other thing you've always got to keep an eye on are private deed restrictions. Most of the land that we have now is no longer in the large parcels, you know, the sections that it was originally divvied up in. Kind of gone are the days of the, 10,000 acre family ranches and stuff. I mean, they still exist, but those parcels have been divided up over time as the families needed money and sold those off. And sometimes they'll put deed restrictions on there that restrict certain types of activity. I've seen deed restrictions on 50-acre parcels that said you can't shoot a gun on it because the family still lives next door and they don't want to have people hunting next to them. Another thing that I've seen is you can't build a house over 25 feet tall because somebody behind you that's still part of the family has a house on a hill and they've got amazing views and they don't want you to build your house in their view line. So just because it's unrestricted doesn't necessarily mean you can do whatever you want. You still got to check all these other layers. The third thing I'm going to do, and this is when I start finding properties that are interesting, is I'm going to identify, okay, which properties am I interested in, but then I'm going to use what I call a land scorecard to verify that that function that I had in part number 1, that function is actually going to be able to be done on that property. And so using something tangible like a scorecard that allows you to take the emotion out of the decision, and at that point now you're just thinking with economics, because look, you don't want to buy a big piece of property that you can't do what you want to do and end up wasting $200,000 or $300,000. So here's what I do on my land scorecard. The first thing I'm going to look at is topography. Can I actually build what I want to build on that land without spending $100,000 on excavation or cut and fill or bringing in a lot of road base to get out of a floodplain? The second thing I'm going to look at is soil type. Will it pass a perk test, a percolation test? In order to put a septic system in, most states are going to require you to get a perk test on that property to see if you can put that septic system in, if the ground will absorb the effluent that's coming out of that septic system. So what is the soil type? And you can find websites where you can get an idea of what the soil type is just by government surveys, but there is nothing that's going to beat actually getting your feet on the ground on that property with somebody who understands septic in that area and kicking the dirt around and seeing, hey, does this look like something that we can put a septic in? Okay, if it does, then let's go ahead and start the process. But honestly, a lot of septic installers, they can tell you just from their experience in the area, nope, this area will not work. They're not going to give you a certification for this. So this always goes back to, I say this in all my videos, you've got to have a great team around you. Now, obviously here in Central Texas, I can help you easily. I've got the experience, I've got the people, but even outside of the state of Texas, I've got resources in just about every state out there. So if this is something that you need help with, let me know. It's not always about realtors. Not everybody wants to use realtors, and that's fine, I get it. But you do need to have contractors, you need to have engineers, you need to have potentially architects that are familiar. Local knowledge is absolutely priceless in situations like this. So if you need those resources, wherever you're looking, let me know. I'm more than happy to help you out with it. After the soil type, now we need to figure out where we're getting water from. Okay, is there a municipal water supply close by? Are you next to a river or a lake? If you are, maybe you can pump water directly out of it and filter it, but most of the time, especially in states like Colorado, Texas, we're a rule of capture. If you're on it, as long as there's no state regulations on it, you can pump water directly out. But states like Colorado, water rights are a real serious thing, and especially other states out in the West where it's dry, if you don't have water rights to that river, if they catch you pumping water out of it, you are screwed. So if you can't get your water from a river, or you're not going to get it from municipal water supply, what are your other options? Well, you can dig a well. Well, now you got to find out how deep the other wells are around there, how they're producing. And again, that goes back to local knowledge. You need to find somebody that's actively putting wells in the ground in that area to tell you. Another thing that's an option for you, or could be an option, is what I do. It's a whole house rainwater catchment. I've got about 28,000 gallons of rainwater that I filter, and that's what we use in the house. Pluses and negatives on. I'm not going to have a really green plush yard. I don't care. I've got a great supply of water that tastes great, and it doesn't have chlorine and all that other stuff in it, so it works for me. But when you're assessing this land, where are you going to get your water from? Are you going to have to truck it in on the back of a truck? Okay, that can get expensive over time. I personally wouldn't want to do that. Or do you have any of these other options available? All right, now that we figured out water, where are you going to get your electricity from? If you're okay going off grid and you want to set up a solar array and that's how you're going to do it, great. I hope it doesn't get too hot there, because if you need an air conditioner, that's kind of hard to run off of a solar array. So, you need to find out. If you want to go off grid, that's fine, but what's the climate like? Can you actually do off grid? So that's a possibility for some people. Other than that, where is the nearest power infrastructure? Are you going to have to bring power in from a mile away? Okay, that gets pretty dang expensive. Or is there a power line running on the front? Or again, if you've got a river flowing by, maybe the state will let you put in a little hydro plant and you might be able to get your electricity like that. But again, these are things on the scorecard that you've got to figure out ahead of time. And it's not rocket science, right? You can drive down the road and see a power line. Okay, great, we've got power here. But at that point, you have to take the next step and call the power company that supplies that line and say, hey, can you put a drop for me here? Because sometimes the power line is too high powered. They can't put a drop. They've got to bring it in off of an auxiliary line or something like that. So there's a lot of nuance here. Again, if you're trying to do this on your own, okay, if you're experienced with it, great. But if you're not, I mean, you can learn a lot of stuff on ChatGPT and Google, but man, again, it goes back to nothing beats having somebody with feet on the ground that have experience in the area you're looking at. And then the last thing is road maintenance. I'm identifying properties in the mountains right now. And one of the first things that I've got to look at up there is, okay, can I get there in all 4 seasons? Is it accessible? Because a lot of times, some of the properties that are most intriguing to me, you can't access them for 5 to 6 months out of the year because they're park roads. Nobody actively plows them. So unless I want to get out there with a plow and keep my road clean, you know, when it's snowing, I'm not going to have access during half of the year. So from a financial standpoint, does that make sense? I mean, the other part of that is you might be able to find a neighbor that has been clearing that road in the winter, but most of the time landowners don't really know that because they're not on site during the winter. I mean, heck, there's a lot of people in Colorado that live in Texas. They have no idea what that property looks like in the winter, but their neighbor up the road has been clearing it for the last 15 or 20 years, and there's perfect accessibility. So again, being able to get on the ground, talk to neighbors, find out about things like, hey, what are the roads like up here in the winter? Or right now, you know, in May and June in Colorado's a rainy season, and a couple of the properties that I have up there, the roads get really rutted out because you're getting rains every day and people are driving over them and they get rough, and the county may not be out to maintain them, but maybe every 2 or 3 months. So, you know, sometimes those roads get pretty bad. So road maintenance, who maintains it? Are they maintained? Are they maintained year round? These are all really important things for that land scorecard. Those are the things that I use personally, and they usually satisfy my needs. But again, going back to that first step, the function, if there's additional things that you need on that scorecard, just things that are absolutely non-negotiable, put them on that scorecard. And then when you're done with each parcel and you filled it out, look at it. If it's, and you can do it, you know, 1 to 3, 1 to 5, 1 to 10, whatever your method is. But if you look at that card and 2 of those things score very poorly, I wouldn't buy that property, because if you look at the things that I just told you, if 2 of those things are not accessible or are going to be really expensive to get, that's going to make that property really expensive. So if you're still going to consider it, it had better be one phenomenal piece of property. The fourth part of this is after you've gone through that scorecard and you've identified properties that these are legitimate contenders. Okay, now we're getting to the point where we're going to put in an offer. We're going to go into contract on this property. So now we have another list that I call a red flag checklist. These are the things that will absolutely kill a deal. So either before you submit that contract or during your feasibility period, that due diligence period at the front, you have to check these things out. The first thing on this deal killer list is encroachments and easements. Make sure that you have a survey on this property. You may not be able to get a survey from the landowner before you go under contract, but if you are buying a piece of property at this point in time with the litigious society that we're in, there is no way I would buy a piece of property without a brand new survey. Once you have that survey, now you're going to understand, okay, where are the utility poles really? Where are the fence lines? Are the fence lines on the property lines, or are they off? Are there encroachments? That's what that is. Where are the easements that allow you to get access to the property? Do you have an easement? Like, is it a public road on the front, or do you have to drive through somebody else's property to get there? If you have to drive through somebody else's property to get there, you have to make sure that that easement is recorded in the county, because if it's not a recorded easement, a legal easement, there's nothing saying that the other property owner can't just fence you out. Again, this survey and making sure you understand the encroachments and easements on that property, absolutely vital. Do not skip this step. The second part of this red flag checklist is, are there any environmental issues that you need to be aware about? Look up on the federal government site Superfund sites. This is an EPA map that shows potential hazards. If the property is near maybe an old gas station, an old dump, a manufacturing facility, it's going to show up on that map. And if you're close to one of those facilities, you're definitely going to want to get a phase 1 environmental assessment on the property. And again, you can look up Superfund sites prior to going under contract, but you're not going to be able to get that phase 1 environmental until you get under contract. So that's going to have to be done during your due diligence period. Now, if you see that it's close to a Superfund site and you know at the beginning, hey, I'm going to have to get a phase 1 on this thing, then you're going to need to make sure your due diligence period is long enough to get that in. I mean, after all, you're dealing with things that the federal government looks at, not necessarily with a government entity, but these are things that the government looks at. So the companies that you're going to hire to do those phase 1 assessments, they're going to take a little bit of a longer time than you might want, just because they have to make sure that their T's are crossed and their I's are dotted. And then the last thing on this red flag checklist is, and this may not necessarily be a red flag depending on your ultimate use, but you're going to want to check flood zones. And again, government website, FEMA maps will take you to maps that you can put in the address or at least zoom in on a map either way. And you'll find out, hey, is this a X zone, AE zone, whatever it is. And you'll be able to tell, is it a floodway, which is different than a 100-year floodplain, which is different than a 500-year floodplain, which is different from there's no problem with any of this stuff, the X zone. So make sure you're checking that out ahead of time. Again, maybe this is strictly a recreational play and all you're going to do is build a motocross track on it, or you're going to hunt deer on it, and you don't care if it's a flood zone because it only floods once or twice a year. You're okay with that. But if you've got any use for that property that it can't be in a flood zone, like if you want to build a house on it, if you build in a flood zone, you're going to have pretty high insurance, and insurance is getting worse and worse. I'm talking about this on a lot of videos right now. But again, you want to understand what are the risks associated with that property, and that's what that red flag checklist is all about. So again, make sure you understand the easements and encroachments. You got to have that survey done. Make sure you understand if it's close to a Superfund site. Look that up on the EPA's website, and then go to the FEMA website and make sure that it's not in a flood zone, or if it is there land out of the flood zone you can still utilize for what you want, or do you really care if it's in a flood zone? Now, you probably need to do step 4 and step 5 at the same time, and maybe even step 3 and step 5. But step 5 is, how do you pay? You can use cash. That's fine. If you've got enough cash to take care of the land acquisition, any of the infrastructure that you want to put in, and what you want for your goal on that site afterwards, if you've got that much cash, great, go to work. But if you don't, or if you don't want to use it, because I've been telling a lot of clients lately, if you look at what investments do over time, you may not want to put all of your cash into land unless you're trying to get it out of that type of investment. But if you don't want to put all of your investment into the land, okay, now we need to come up with options. So if you've got assets, and at this point I'm assuming you do, first thing you can look at is a HELOC, a home equity line of credit. A lot of people don't like them, but certain times they might make sense. You can take out a HELOC to acquire the land, and then when you go to build a permanent residence or something else on it, now you can go back, get a construction loan, and refinance out of that HELOC so that everything is under the construction loan and it's interest only at that point in time. But at any rate, it may be an opportunity for you. And again, especially if you have a lot of money that's locked up in investments, you don't have direct access to them. Okay, maybe a HELOC is more of a bridge loan where you can use it just for a period of time while you're waiting to remove investments and not have to pay a penalty for doing so. Another thing you may be able to do is if you've got self-directed IRAs. There's a lot of people that buy investment properties and land with self-directed IRAs. Now, it gets a little bit tricky if you're trying to do a homestead on it. I'm not a CPA. You're going to have to talk to your financial tax advisor on that. But self-directed IRAs can be used to purchase land. That's where I'm going to leave it. So maybe worth a talk with your CPA or your tax advisor just to kind of evaluate those options. And then the other thing here is there's always the possibility of doing seller financing. Seller financing has gotten a little bit of a, kind of a iffy reputation, and a lot of sellers do use it to take advantage of buyers. But if you do it correctly, it can work out in your favor. Well, and I don't say it can work out in your favor. I mean, everything's negotiable. So hopefully it's going to work out in the favor of you and the seller. That's kind of the best way to get a deal done. But owner financing can be a great option. Sometimes you might be able to get a piece of property for only 10% down, whereas if you're going a more conventional route and getting a loan from one of the local banks or a credit union, you may have to put 20 or 25% down. So a seller may be okay with just getting 10% down and then amortizing your loan out over 20 years and then making you refinance it before you get to 5. So there's ways to set it up, there's ways to structure it. And the other good thing about seller financing is sellers typically aren't, they're not hell-bent on getting market rate for their interest rates. So you might be able to get a 1 or 2 point reduction or a premium below the market interest rate by going to a seller. I mean, what are they going to do at the end of the day? Take their cash and put it into a bank where they're going to get 2 or 3% interest in a long-term CD or something like that? Being able to have those conversations with sellers and with other agents potentially and let them see the good, like, hey, you're going to benefit from this. I'm going to benefit because I'm going to get a lower interest rate, but you're going to benefit because you're still going to get a higher rate than what you're going to get at your bank. Now, the other thing I'm going to caution you about on seller financing is please don't do this on your own unless you've got a lot of experience doing it. I always recommend getting an attorney in that state that can draw up those documents for you that'll keep you out of trouble. All right, step 6, and we're getting to this now. Okay, we're under contract, got our financing figured out, everything else. Now we're going to talk about closing the property correctly. I've got a seller right now that's got a piece of land, raw piece of land. She bought it on a note that was signed, not by the landowner, but by the landowner's brother. I guess she thought she was getting a good enough deal that it didn't matter. Well, the landowner's deceased. The brother's moved to Florida. Nobody can get in contact with with him. Nobody can do a chain of ownership on this property. So she's holding a piece of land that's basically worthless unless one of her neighbors wants to buy it from her. And then at that point, she's going to be selling it for pennies on the dollar just because she didn't close it right. What do I mean by she didn't close it right? Well, we're in Texas. Here we use title companies. And in some states, it might be a law office, an attorney's office, a fee office, something like that. But regardless of where it happens in the state that you're buying land, make sure you get title insurance. If she had title insurance, whoever she closed with would have made sure that whoever was signing that deed over to her had the ability to sign that deed over to her. So it's a clear chain of ownership that they can trace, and now she's protected when she goes to sell it the next time. Because she doesn't have title insurance, nobody knows who the chain of ownership went through, and now she's stuck with that piece of property. I mentioned this earlier, closing it right, make sure you have a survey. And again, I know the owner may have gotten a survey done 2 years ago, and you may have walked every corner like I always tell you to do, and you see where the stakes are and all of that. Guys, to me, in my opinion, it doesn't matter. I would always get a new survey, period. I've mentioned this one also before. Make sure that you understand what the deed restrictions are. If you can get them ahead of time and read through them, and you can ask the agent, you can ask the owner, are there deed restrictions, and get them, but the agent or owner may not know. Again, when you close this and get title insurance, they have to disclose deed restrictions, so they're going to do a search in the county record or the state record or the city record to find out, are there any deed restrictions? And when those deed restrictions come up, they're going to deliver them to you. Read those deed restrictions. If you don't understand them, find an attorney or find a realtor that can help you out with them, because I mean, I deal with them all the time, and I've seen some crazy ones, like I said, but you've got to know up front before you go to close that property, what are the deed restrictions? Can I do with this what I actually want to do with it? And the other thing is, and this isn't necessarily a closing thing, but before you close, talk to your neighbors, visit that property, find neighbors. And look, if you're out in the country, your neighbors might be 3 miles away, but track down the closest neighbors and talk to them. I mean, the first thing that it'll do is it'll give you an idea of who your neighbors are. Do you actually want to live next to the people? But the other thing is, they can give you that local insight. Hey, that property's been for sale 15 times over the last 30 years and nobody's ever bought it because there is a giant septic dump site out there and it was never picked up on a Superfund site. The government doesn't know about it, but all the locals know about it and nobody will buy it. Holy crap, I want to know that. And the only way you're going to get that information is if you talk to the neighbors. So be friendly. A couple of words of caution. If you pull up to somebody's house and they're not expecting you, do not get out of the vehicle. Tap your horn a couple of times and wait. And a couple of minutes go by, tap your horn a couple of times and wait. And if nobody comes out, don't go to the door. You never know who's got a dog or a shotgun behind that door. So leave, come back at another time. Tap your horn a couple times. I'm just telling you, I grew up in the country, I understand this. You don't want to just roll up to somebody's house in the middle of nowhere where nobody else is within 15 miles and go beating on somebody's door. Just don't do that. And at the end of the day, guys, buying land, this isn't complicated, but it's definitely not casual. And that's why I'm trying to give you a little bit better advice, a little bit deeper, kind of deep level advice that you might not get from somebody else or, somewhere on the internet. Because at this point, you're watching me on YouTube, you've looked through Google, you've probably asked ChatGPT, but again, it's not a surface level thing. And a lot of times you just get surface level content. And a lot of times people get tired of hearing me say this, but you've got to have those local resources. Again, personally, I think a good realtor is worth their weight in gold. If you're getting a realtor, find somebody who understands land, find somebody who understands all the topics that I've talked about here. Find somebody who understands construction and knows what it's all about to go get a construction loan and take construction draws and do all that stuff. If you're looking for land, if you're looking for the ability to do that, and you've got a realtor who's just used to dealing in downtown high-rises, man, get another realtor. Even if they're your sister, go get another realtor. You need somebody who can keep you out of trouble. But beyond that, you need your contractors, you need septic installers. You need to know people locally in the government to find out, hey, that road that's in front of my property, is there anything major that's planned for that thing? These are all those local resources that you've got to have. And again, if you're looking in a state that's not your own or an area that's not your own, and you don't have anybody that you know there, you don't know who to trust, reach out to me. I've been in this business a long time, and I've met people all over this state and all over the country that I really, really trust, and they think a lot like I do. So if you've got questions for somebody like that in another area, reach out to me. I'll put you in contact with them. We'll take good care of you.